The Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel had a particular kind of silence on the night of March 4th, 1960. Not the silence of emptiness. The room was full, every table occupied, every leather booth glowing under the warm amber chandeliers. It was a silence of people being careful. The silence of those who understood that certain rooms, on certain nights, belonged to certain men. Dean Martin was 39 years old that evening. He was at the height of everything. The records were selling faster than Capitol could press them. The films were packing theaters from Burbank to Manhattan. And the effortless, slow-burning cool that poured off him like smoke from an unlit cigarette had made him not just famous, but untouchable in a way that only a very rare kind of man ever becomes. He didn't carry himself like a celebrity. He carried himself like a man who had absolutely nowhere else he'd rather be. And that kind of peace in Hollywood was worth more than any contract. He was at his corner booth with a bourbon he hadn't touched yet, waiting. Marilyn Monroe was due to arrive at 8. She was late. She was always late. Dean had long since stopped minding. Marilyn moved through the world like a comet through a solar system. Her own gravitational rules applied, and the rest of the universe adjusted accordingly. He loved her the way you love a rare thing you've been trusted to look after. She was his friend, his strange, brilliant, heartbreaking friend. And in March of 1960, she was also the most famous woman alive. She arrived at 8:22 in a cream silk dress that made the room forget how to exhale. Her hair was platinum and impossibly precise. She slid into the booth across from Dean, kissed him on the cheek, and laughed at something only she thought of in the car. The waiter materialized. She ordered champagne. Dean finally picked up his bourbon. It was going to be a good evening. He could feel it. He didn't yet know that 12 feet away, a man named Carmine the architect, Falcone, was watching her from a bar. Carmine Falcone was 54 years old and had been one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles for the better part of 2 decades. His nickname wasn't earned through construction. It was earned through the way he built systems of control. Layers of leverage, debt, fear, and obligation stacked so precisely that the whole structure held without a single visible seam. He owned 3 city councilmen outright. He had a federal judge in Chicago who owed him a favor he'd never collected. He had legitimate real estate, a dry cleaning chain, and 2 restaurants that nobody ate at but everybody paid for. He had come to the Polo Lounge that night for a meeting with a studio accountant who was 3 months late on a repayment. The meeting had gone well, in the way that meetings with Carmine always went well. The other party left shaken and compliant, and Carmine got everything he came for. He should have left. Instead, he stayed at the bar, and he watched Marilyn Monroe. And something old and ugly in him decided that tonight he wanted to feel powerful in a different way. The waiter delivered Marilyn champagne. She was laughing at something Dean had said, her head tilted back, completely herself and completely unguarded in that rare way she sometimes managed in the company of people she trusted. Dean was watching her the way a man watches something genuinely beautiful. Not possessively, not hungrily, but with simple, uncomplicated appreciation. Carmine Falcone picked up his drink. He turned on his bar stool. He looked at the back of his hand for a moment, then looked at the waiter preparing Marilyn's second glass of champagne on the service station 4 feet away. He waited until the waiter's back was turned. Then he leaned forward, reached across, and spat directly into Marilyn Monroe's champagne flute. He did it casually, like it was nothing. Like she was nothing. He settled back onto his bar stool, signaled for another scotch, and smiled at the mirror behind the bottles. Dean Martin had very good eyes. People underestimated this about him, because he played the role of the relaxed one, the one who didn't appear to be paying particular attention to anything. But the act was the act. Underneath the studied ease, underneath the bourbon and a half smile, Dean Martin watched everything. It was a survival instinct refined over 30 years of working rooms that could turn on you in an instant. You learned to read a room the way a sailor reads a sea, constantly, automatically, without apparent effort. He saw Falcone's hand reach. He saw what Falcone did, and he felt something close in him, a door shutting quietly behind his eyes. He didn't say anything to Marilyn. He looked at her laughing, and he made a decision in the span of about 2 seconds, and the decision was not impulsive, and it was not emotional in any visible way. It was simply the only decision he was capable of making. He reached across the table and gently, With one hand, moved Marilyn's champagne flute to the side of the table. "Try the burgundy," he said. "I've been meaning to order it all week." Marilyn raised an eyebrow. "You hate burgundy." "I hate bad burgundy. This place keeps the good stuff." He waved for the waiter. "Bring us a pomade, would you? The 55 if you have it." The waiter nodded and disappeared with both glasses. Marilyn shrugged with a particular grace of someone used to the world slightly rearranging itself around her. Dean settled back into the booth. He kept his face completely relaxed. Underneath the table, his right hand was very still. He looked across the room toward the bar. Carmine Falcone met his gaze for exactly 1 second, then looked away. The kind of look away that tells you everything. The shift of someone who knows they were seen, and is deciding whether that matters. Dean let his eyes drift back to Marilyn. He smiled at something she said. He picked up his bourbon and finally drank it. He was thinking very clearly. The way he always thought clearly when the stakes were actually high, which was the opposite of how most people assumed it worked with him. He had recognized Falcone immediately. You didn't move through the world Dean Martin moved through without knowing the architecture of the men who thought they built it. Dean Martin did not panic. He did not escalate. He finished dinner with Marilyn Monroe, and he laughed, and he ordered the pomade, and he was, by every observable measure, exactly the relaxed, charming man the room expected him to be. But at 10:15 p.m., while Marilyn was in the powder room, he excused himself to the telephone alcove near the coat check and made 2 calls. The first was to a man named Gio Ferrante, who was not exactly in the entertainment business. Gio had grown up 3 streets over from Dean in Steubenville, Ohio. They had been friends since they were 11 years old. Gio had gone one direction and Dean had gone another, but the friendship had never broken, and it had proven, over the years, to be worth considerably more than sentiment. "I need everything you have on a man named Carmine Falcone," Dean said. "Los Angeles. Calls himself the architect." "I know who he is," Gio said. "I know you do. That's why I called you." A pause. "What happened?" "I'll explain it when I see you. What I need right now is to understand who he answers to and what he values most." "That's a specific kind of question, Dean." "I'm asking a specific kind of question." Another pause, longer this time. "Give me 48 hours. The second call was to a man named Harold Maurer, who was a private investigator, the old school, the kind who kept records on everyone as a matter of professional habit and had, over 20 years, assembled a catalog of information that certain people in Los Angeles would have paid extraordinary sums to destroy. Harold was quiet and meticulous and entirely without loyalty except to whoever was currently paying him, but Dean had been paying him a retainer for 6 years, which meant Harold's loyalty was, for all practical purposes, fixed. "I need a full profile," Dean said. "Carmine Falcone, everything you have, and I need to know who he's meeting with in the next 2 weeks." "You'll have it by Thursday," Harold said. "I need it by Wednesday." "Tuesday, if you double the rate." "Tuesday," Dean said. He hung up. He straightened his jacket in the small mirror above the telephone. He walked back to the booth just as Marilyn was returning, and he ordered dessert and listened to her talk about something Arthur Miller had said the previous week, and he was present for all of it. He was just also thinking about something else underneath. The profile Harold Maurer delivered on Tuesday morning was 22 pages. Dean read it at his kitchen table with a second cup of coffee, moving through it the way he moved through a new score, patiently, looking for the structure beneath the surface. Carmine Falcone had arrived in Los Angeles in 1941 with $300 and a letter of introduction to a man who ran loan operations out of a restaurant in Boyle Heights. By 1945, he'd absorbed the operation. By 1950, he'd built a network that stretched from the garment district to the film unions and into the management offices of 2 major studios. He was careful. He was never the principal in anything that could be prosecuted. He was always the middle layer, the invisible pressure, the hand that turned without being seen to move. He had a wife in Pasadena, 2 daughters in private school, a son at USC studying business. He went to Mass on Sundays at a church in Brentwood, where he donated generously to the building fund. He also had, according to Harold's files, a very specific vulnerability. His operation in Los Angeles depended almost entirely on the continued cooperation of a man named Louis Breccia, who ran the projectionist union and therefore controlled, in a very practical sense, whether any film in the city actually reached an audience. Without Breccia, Falcone's leverage over the studios evaporated, and Breccia, Harold's files noted, was a man who had political ambitions, a man who was, in the spring of 1960, increasingly uncomfortable with the company he kept, a man who was looking for an exit. Dean set the file down. He picked up his coffee. He looked out the window at the garden for a long time. He wasn't going to hurt anyone. That wasn't the plan. The plan was something more precise and more permanent. Dean made his third call on Wednesday afternoon, this time to Frank Sinatra. He told Frank what had happened. Frank's response was immediate and colorful and involved language that the telephone operator would remember for years. Dean let him finish. "What do you need?" Frank asked. "I need you to know. That's all. I need you to know. And I need you to stand where I can see you if this goes in a direction I don't expect." "Done," Frank said. "What else?" "I need a name at the FBI. Someone clean." Frank was quiet for a moment. "I know a man. Lenny Gersh. He's out of the Las Vegas field office. Methodical. He's been building a file on Falcone for 2 years, but can't find an opening. I might be able to give him one." "I'll make the call," Frank said. The fourth call was to Sammy Davis Jr., not because Sammy had any operational role in what was coming, but because Dean told Sammy everything. That was simply how their friendship worked. Sammy listened in a particular focused way he had, asking no questions until Dean was finished. "What does Marilyn know?" Sammy asked. "Nothing, and she won't. She'll be angry when she finds out." "Probably," Dean said. "That's a problem for later." "And Falcone? He doesn't know you saw." "He knows I saw. He's decided it doesn't matter. That's the mistake." Gio Ferrante called back on Wednesday evening. "Falcone answers to Chicago," Gio said, "specifically to a man named Sal Dente who runs the Midwest operations. But here's the thing, Dean. Falcone and Dente are not friends. Falcone's been moving money west without full accounting to Chicago for about 18 months. Dente's suspects but can't prove it." "That's interesting," Dean said. "It gets more interesting. Falcone has a payment coming in from the studio deal. Cash, off the books, substantial. It's moving next Thursday through a dry cleaning facility he owns in Culver City. Harold gave me the same information from a different direction." "Then you have confirmation," Gio said. "Yes, I do." Dean paused. "Gio, I'm going to give that information to a federal agent. I want to be clear about that." Silence. "That's your call to make, Dean. I gave you the information free. Do what you need to do with it." "I knew you'd say that." "I'll say something else too," Gio said. "Falcone is a man who does things in public to humiliate people because he believes he's invisible. That comes from never having been caught. When he gets caught, he won't have the psychological structure to handle it. Men like that never do. That's what I'm counting on," Dean said. He called Lenny Gersh at the Las Vegas field office. Lenny came to Los Angeles the following morning and sat in Dean Martin's living room drinking coffee, listening to Dean explain what Harold's surveillance and Joe's intelligence had assembled. Dean gave him Harold's file. He gave him the location of the Culver City dry cleaning facility, the date, the anticipated movement of cash. Lenny Gersh was a careful man. He didn't commit to anything in that room, but his eyes moved over file the way a man's eyes move over something he's been looking for, and when he left, he shook Dean's hand for a long time without saying much of anything, which said everything. 3 days before the Thursday payment, Harold Maurer called Dean at 7 in the morning with urgency in his voice. "Falcone knows someone's been asking questions," Harold said. "I don't know how, but he pulled his surveillance countermeasures and he's gone quiet. The Thursday movement may be postponed." Dean felt a shift. Not panic, just recalibration. What's he doing? Sitting very still, talking to his lawyers. He made a call to Chicago last night. I picked it up on a tap I've had on the restaurant line. He didn't say much on the call, but what he said was enough. He mentioned a problem with unauthorized attention. He thinks this is coming from someone in the industry. That's my read. He thinks it's a studio play. He doesn't know it's personal. Dean sat with that for a moment. Does that change his behavior or just his timing? Timing. He'll move the payment, but he won't cancel it. He needs the money to keep his Chicago accounting looking clean. So we need to give him a reason to move quickly rather than slowly. That's my thinking, Harold said. Dean thought it through. There was one way to accelerate Falcone's timeline without tipping him off, and it required a very specific kind of performance. It required Dean Martin to do something he almost never did. It required him to make himself visible. Dean Martin called the maitre d' at Romanoff's the following morning and made a reservation for Friday evening for a table of 6. He made sure the reservation was noted in the trades by Thursday afternoon, a small item, 2 sentences, the kind of thing that ran in the industry columns as a matter of course. Dean Martin and Associates, Friday at Romanoff's. Word, in Los Angeles in 1960, moved fast in certain circles. By Thursday evening, Harold's sources confirmed that Carmine Falcone had made a reservation at Romanoff's for Friday as well. Dean had anticipated this. Falcone was the kind of man who had to put himself in a room with a perceived problem in order to feel in control of it. He'd come to Romanoff's to get a look at Dean, to assess whether Dean was actually a threat or just coincidental noise. And while he was busy doing that, while his attention was fixed on a room in front of him, Lenny Gersh and 4 agents from the Los Angeles field office would execute a search warrant at the dry cleaning facility in Culver City. Because the payment hadn't been postponed, it had been moved up. Falcone had wanted to clear the money out before things got further complicated. Harold had caught the rescheduling on Thursday morning. Lenny Gersh had the warrant updated by Thursday afternoon. Falcone was going to Romanoff's Friday night to watch Dean Martin. And Dean Martin was going to Romanoff's Friday night to make absolutely certain that Carmine Falcone was not in Culver City. Romanoff's on Friday night was everything the Hollywood of that era was supposed to be. Red leather booze, old money, new money, and a particular kind of beautiful that only existed in a city built entirely on the manufacture of beautiful things. Dean arrived at 8 with Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and 2 women from the studio's talent list who had no idea they were functioning as social architecture. They were loud and charming and occupied the room in the way the Rat Pack always occupied rooms, completely, effortlessly, making everyone else feel like they were watching something they'd been very lucky to find. Carmine Falcone arrived at 8:30 with 2 associates and took a table on the opposite side of the room. He was dressed well. He looked calm. He spent 20 minutes not looking at Dean Martin in the careful way that means you're looking at nothing else. At 9 o'clock, Dean excused himself from the table and walked, unhurried, across the room. He stopped at Falcone's table. Falcone looked up. His 2 associates tensed. Dean put his hands in his pockets and looked at Falcone for a moment with an expression of mild, almost clinical interest. The way a man examines something confirmed what he already knows about it. Carmine, Dean said pleasantly. Martin, Falcone said. His voice was controlled, but something behind it was running the numbers. I want to come over personally, Dean said, because I think you've been wondering what's happening and I respect that. Wondering isn't comfortable. I don't know what you're talking about, Falcone said. Sure you do. Dean pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. Falcone's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You're wondering whether what you did at the Polo Lounge the other night was seen, and if it was what it means, and if it means something, what you should do about it. The 2 associates looked at their boss. Falcone said nothing. Here's what I can tell you, Dean said, his voice the same easy register he used when he was singing. Conversational, unhurried, quietly in control of every note. The answer to all 3 questions is yes. Yes, it was seen. Yes, it means something. And what you should do about it is already out of your hands. A very long silence. You made a mistake, Carmine. Not because of me. I'm just a singer, right? But you've been making mistakes for a while, and they have a way of compounding. Dean tilted his head slightly. Chicago isn't happy, by the way. From what I understand. Falcone's color changed. Just slightly. Just enough. I don't know who you've been talking to, Falcone said, and now the control was fraying at the edges. I know you don't. That's also a mistake. Dean stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked down at Falcone with something that wasn't contempt. It was more distant than contempt, more final. You sat at a bar and you spat in a woman's drink because you thought no one who mattered would ever see you do it. Because you thought she was something you could treat like nothing. Because you've been invisible so long you forgot what it feels like to be looked at. He let that land. You're being looked at now, Carmine. He walked back across the room to his table. He sat down. He picked up his drink. Sammy raised an eyebrow at him, and Dean very slightly shook his head, which meant later. Frank was watching Falcone's table, and Dean didn't need to turn around and know what Frank was seeing. At 9:47 p.m., Carmine Falcone's attorney called him on the restaurant telephone. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When Falcone returned to his table, both his associates could see that something had happened, though neither of them would have been able to name it precisely. The man who had walked the phone and the man who walked back were not quite the same man. The search warrant had been executed. The cash had been found. And perhaps more critically, the discrepancy between what had been found and what Carmine Falcone had reported to Chicago over the previous 18 months had been documented and would shortly be in possession of people in that city who were far more dangerous to Carmine Falcone than any federal agent. Falcone left Romanoff's at 10 o'clock. He did not look at Dean Martin's table on his way out. The federal indictment came down 6 weeks later. 15 counts, including racketeering, tax fraud, and obstruction. The dry cleaning facility in Culver City was seized. 2 of Falcone's associates took deals, and the information they provided to prosecutors in exchange for leniency was, by all accounts, considerable. Louis Breccia, the projectionist union man, resigned his position 3 months later and subsequently cooperated with a separate state investigation into union operations. He gave testimony that closed 3 additional cases the DA's office had considered cold. Chicago's response to the discovery of Falcone's unauthorized skimming was not legal in nature. By the end of summer, Carmine Falcone had lost every relationship that constituted the architecture of his power. The organization that had made him untouchable concluded that he was, in fact, very much touchable, and worse, unreliable, and moved accordingly. He was never charged in connection with what happened at the Polo Lounge. There was no legal mechanism for charging him with what he'd done to Marilyn Monroe's champagne glass. But the men who had the most reason to protect him were the men who had the most reason to abandon him. And without protection, a man like Carmine Falcone had nothing left to be. He moved to Florida in the fall of 1960. By 1962, he was running a small restaurant in Fort Lauderdale. He was charged with liquor license fraud in 1965 and lost the restaurant. After that, there is no further public record of consequence. The architect had built his last thing. 3 weeks after the indictment, Dean Martin was at Marilyn Monroe's house in Brentwood. They were sitting in her kitchen. She had coffee. He had tea, which surprised her, and she said so. "You're drinking tea?" "Experiment," he said. "How is it?" "Terrible." He set it down. "Marilyn, I need to tell you something about the Polo Lounge." She looked at him with those eyes, the ones that made directors insane with gratitude and helplessness simultaneously. "I wondered when you were going to tell me." He stopped. "You know, I know something happened. I could feel it. You moved my glass, and you ordered wine neither of us particularly wanted, and you spent the rest of dinner looking like a man who had just quietly made a decision." She put her coffee down. "What was it?" He told her. He told her everything. He watched her face move through a series of expressions. First a stillness, then something that might have been disgust, then something that was harder to name. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You didn't tell me," she said. "No, because you didn't want me to be frightened." "Because I didn't want you to carry it," he said. "You carry enough things, Marilyn. You always have." She looked at him for a very long moment. "I'm angry with you." "I know. And I'm also—" She stopped. She looked at the table. "I've had a lot of people in my life who said they cared about me," she said finally. "And I've had a much smaller number of people who actually did things about it. Quietly, without making me feel weak or watched or handled. You're none of those things." "I know what I am," she said. But the way she said it wasn't quite as certain as she probably wanted it to sound. I know what I am and I know what I'm not. And mostly I know who actually sees me versus who sees the thing I've made. She looked up at him. You saw it happen and you protected me without turning it into something I had to live through. She shook her head slightly. That's what friends are for, Dean said. No, she said firmly. That's what very particular kinds of friends are for. The kind most people never get. She reached across the table and held his hand for a moment. Then she let go and picked up her coffee again and said something about a film she was thinking about taking, and the moment passed back into the ordinary rhythm of the afternoon. But the thing that had been said remained said. Word moved through Los Angeles the way it always does in a small city that pretends to be large, through agents and assistants and restaurant conversations and telephone calls made from the lobbies of buildings where people come and go constantly and are never quite certain who's listening. What people understood in aggregate, without it being stated in any single place, was that Dean Martin had seen something, had responded to it with methodical, unhurried effectiveness, had brought down a significant and previously untouchable figure without noise, without violence, without a single act that could be considered anything other than legal and precise, and had done it because someone he cared about had been disrespected. The lesson people took from this was not simply that Dean Martin was not to be crossed. The lesson was more specific and more durable than that. The lesson was that certain people, women you came to see perform, entertainers who existed in a position of constructed vulnerability, people who worked in rooms owned by powerful men and were therefore presumed to be subject to whatever those men decided, were not, in fact, undefended. They might not know who was watching. They might not know who had chosen, quietly, to consider their dignity worth protecting, but someone was. And the consequences of failing to understand that were, as Carmine Falcone could now confirm from a restaurant in Fort Lauderdale, both comprehensive and lasting. 3 months after the indictment, there was a meeting at a private club in Beverly Hills. Not formal, not organized, just a gathering of men who happened to find themselves in the same room on a Thursday evening. Frank Sinatra was there, 2 prominent studio heads, a man who represented certain labor interests, and Dean Martin, who arrived late and stayed until the end. The conversation, by multiple accounts, touched at one point on the question of conduct. Specifically, the conduct expected of men who occupied positions of power in relation to people who occupied positions of lesser power. And the conclusion reached, not voted on, not negotiated, just arrived by collective understanding, was that certain behavior would not be tolerated, that the people in that room would not permit it, that if it occurred, there would be consequences, and the consequences would be of the sustained, structural, career-ending variety that made criminal prosecution look like a misdemeanor in comparison. No one attributed the conversation to Dean Martin specifically. He didn't speak more than anyone else. He didn't appear to be leading anything. But when it was over, a man who'd been in a room for 20 years of similar gatherings pulled his son aside on the way out and said, quietly, "Pay attention to how that man operates. That's what real power looks like. Not the noise, the results." Dean Martin never talked publicly about what happened at the Polo Lounge on the night of March 4th, 1960. It was not his style to talk about things that were finished. He had done what he had done and Marilyn was safe and Falcone was gone and the glass of champagne that had been contaminated had been quietly replaced, the waiter bewildered, the evening continuing without visible rupture. But there's a thing that happens to men who act with principle in moments when they could easily choose not to. Something clarifies in them. The action confirms something about who they are that was previously theoretical. After March 1960, Dean Martin knew, without the need for further testing, exactly what he was capable of and exactly where he drew his lines. The line was simple. Certain things were not permitted, not in his presence, not in rooms where he had standing, not to people he had chosen to care about, regardless of whether the people who threatened them were aware of the choice he had made. You didn't get to treat people as props for your own amusement. You didn't get to humiliate the vulnerable because power was available to you. And if you tried, if you sat at a bar and thought no one who mattered could see you, you were making a calculation about visibility that was almost certainly wrong. Dean Martin was almost always watching. Marilyn Monroe died in August of 1962. Dean was one of the few people who attended the small, private graveside service in addition to the larger public ceremony. He stood at the back, not close to any cameras, not seeking acknowledgement from anyone. He had brought a single white flower. He sat down at the graveside and then stood with his hands in his pockets looking at the ground. A photographer caught him leaving. The photograph shows a man walking toward a car, his face turned slightly away from the lens, not performing anything for anyone. He looks like a man who has just lost something he understood the value of and is deciding in real time how to carry the weight of that. He never spoke publicly about her in a way that invited personal scrutiny. He never transformed their friendship into a story that centered himself. In interviews, when her name came up, he would say she was brilliant and that he missed her, and then he would move on to the next question. The friendship was hers to have been, and he didn't see any reason to excavate it for the benefit of strangers. That restraint, in a city built on self-promotion, was its own kind of monument. In the spring of 1961, a small fund was quietly established, not publicized, not attached to any visible name, designed to provide legal representation and housing assistance to women in the entertainment industry facing harassment or exploitation from people in positions of power. The funding was entirely private. The attorneys who administered it were discreet. The women who used it were never identified publicly. The fund operated for 11 years. Its existence was not widely known until 2 decades after it was wound down, when one of the attorneys who administered it mentioned it in passing in an interview given to a legal trade publication. The interviewer asked who had established it. The attorney declined to say. The person who set up, she said, was very specific that their name not be associated with it. They said the point wasn't the credit. The point was that it worked. The interviewer pressed. The attorney smiled. "Let me put it this way," she said. "He was the kind of man who ordered the burgundy when the champagne was wrong." And he left it at that. Carmine Falcone sat in a restaurant in Fort Lauderdale for 4 years watching the ocean between shifts, and the thing he thought about most, the thing that occupied the space where his power used to be, wasn't the indictment. It wasn't Chicago. It wasn't the federal agents or the search warrant or the collapsed architecture of everything he built. It was Dean Martin sitting down across from him, unbothered, unhurried, and saying, "You're being looked at now." He had thought he was invisible. He had thought that was his greatest strength. He never understood until it was entirely too late that he had been visible the whole time, and that the most dangerous man in any room is never the one making the most noise. It's the one who sees everything, says nothing until the moment is exactly right, and then, when he speaks, leaves no doubt about what he is and what he will not permit. Some men buy power. Some men inherit it. Dean Martin simply was it. And the difference between him and every man who ever tried to take something from someone in his presence is this. They were performing strength, and he was living it. That is a distinction that, once you understand it, you feel in your teeth. Some lessons cost everything. The ones that stick usually do. If there's a man in your life who moves through the world the way Dean Martin moved through that room, calm, clear-eyed, unhurried, and absolutely unwilling to let the people he loves be treated as less than they are, hold on to him. Men like that are not made by circumstance. They are revealed by it. And the night that reveals them is usually the night everyone else looks away. That's the kind of man worth remembering. That's the kind of story worth telling.